Where are we? This question about orientation, spatially, geographically, is also a question about what are we up to? What's happening now? For so many of us, the arrival of the coronavirus seems to have upended the world as we knew it. And we're wondering, how are we going to get our bearings? Some of us have found our bearings. Others of us are still struggling along. Some of us have returned back into shul. Others of us are not yet ready to do that. Some of us are back to some of our routine. Many of us still feel a great sense of disorientation. Here's a short lesson from this parsha that I hope will help ground us and give us some chizuk about this idea, about finding one's place when one feels so disoriented. Parshat Masei contains a travel log of 42 places the Jewish people journeyed from the time they left Mitzrayim until they arrive at the borders of Eretz Canaan, just over the Jordan on the east bank of the river. Okay, well, the question could fairly be asked. Well, if one was to flip the pages in a Chumash or to open a Sefer Torah, wouldn't you see all 42 places? Not really. Some of those places are listed in this travelogue, and they don't get any play anywhere else. We've never heard of them, if not for their mention here. That's an easy answer. But there are other questions about this travelogue. For instance, why is it framed as something that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote down? Let me sharpen the question. The Or HaChaim asks this question here on our Parsha. He says, well, Moshe wrote the whole Torah. Why did the Torah have to go out of its way to declare, Vayichtov Moshe et motzehem l'maseihem al pi Hashem ve'ela maseim l'motzeihem? And Moshe wrote down their departures and all of their journeys by the word of Hashem, and these are their journeys to their departures and their departures, some such thing. Writes the Or HaChaim, because this wasn't written down at one moment as a retrospective. Rather, Moshe Rabbeinu kept this travelogue as a diary. He was writing it in his notebook every time they traveled. As he expresses it, Shehitchil Moshe lichtov pinkaso b'mitzvat hamelech miyom shiatzu mitzrayim. Because Moshe started writing down in his own notebook by the command of the king from the first day, from the day that they left Mitzrayim. And therefore the first pasuk, first couple of psukim about leaving Egypt, Vayismei Ramses b'chodesh harishon, the fact they left from Ramses in the first month, that's written down. Then the next place they went to, the next, each and every place is listed. Vayisu mi, vayachanu bit, or vayavo le, something like that. Each time the same syntax. They traveled from, they encamped at. And each one was written contemporaneous to when it happened. So just imagine Moshe Rabbeinu's Pinkas, his notebook. He's got a notebook, and the first 42 lines are all of these places. Well, Moshe doesn't keep writing after that. That's, of course, in the Sefer Torah. But we're still writing. And we can chart, each of us, a listing where we can just flip many, many pages ahead and find our own family story from where we came from, whether we're from Europe or from somewhere in North Africa, or whether we're from Iraq or Iran or from Afghanistan. Wherever our family came from, we can chart it and come right down to our present moment. Here we are in the United States in Shnat Tafshin Pei 5780, which corresponds to 2020. And we ask ourselves, where are we? Well, the answer is, we're right here. We're part of the same journey. This is a very basic point, I know, but the whole Torah is a journey story. From leave your home, leave your family, leave your homeland, etc. Avram Avinu was commanded, all the way to the end of the Torah. The whole thing is a trip, a journey, where? A voyage to Eretz Yisrael. And we're also on that journey, each in our own way. The idea that each of those places should be listed by Moshe Rabbeinu as things are happening is perhaps to remind us that Pinkas has had many, many lines left after it and many innumerable pages. We could fill in the lines after that, where the Jewish people went after they get to Eretz Canaan and set up the first Jewish Commonwealth. Then it would say the Jewish people, Vayisu me'eretz Yisrael, vayachanu bebavel, uva Mitzrayim. And then it would say again, and some of them came back, and they made the second Commonwealth, and then it would describe the exile, Vayisu Yerushalayim, vayachanu beroma, etc., etc. And they went back to Bavel. All the different places that Jewish people have traveled to and journeyed to, and we're still journeying. Where are we? We're right here. We have our own line in the travel log, if you will. Not written by Moshe Rabbeinu now these days, but at least we should see ourselves against that backdrop. And now, during the time period of the coronavirus, so many of us feeling we've stepped through some kind of a gateway. The whole world is upside down. It'll never get back to normal. Wait. We're in a place now. And there's a reason why we're here. Which brings me to my second point. Second point. The Rambam in the Moreh Nevuchim is quoted by the Ramban as explaining that while it is true that each of the individual events that happen in a given place could have people challenge them, deny them, call them into question. One thing could not be called into question: Jewish survival. Now, I'm ad-libbing a little bit. The way the Rambam actually writes it is that when people will see the travel log, they'll realize the Jewish people spent 40 years in the wilderness, away from human beings, completely sequestered, living off the land where there is nothing to live off of, and they survived. Impossible, except if they survived a miraculous way. Well, we survive in a miraculous way. Our wilderness has changed, perhaps, in terms of its topography and its landscape. It's not always physical and geographic. So often it is spiritual, it's emotional, it's a feeling of disorientation and perhaps even exile from oneself. But all of this, and the will to go on, putting one foot in front of the other, that's the idea, says the Rambam, of the miracle of Jewish survival. And that's what he writes. The future generation should see how the Jewish people were able to survive. These great signs that Jewish people were actually able to keep on going for 40 years. They couldn't have done it alone. We can't do it alone. We need Hashem's help, and to make sure that Kadosh Baruch Hu is part of that journey with us. Point number 3, the Or HaChaim and the Kedushat Levi and many of the Hasidic masters quote from the Zohar HaKadosh that each of the individual places, the 42 places the Jewish people went, had an independent significance because each of them had their own purpose. The Jewish people in each place had to do what's called, in the Kabbalistic language, the mal nitzotza, to raise up the sparks of holiness that are in that place. Let me say it in much less mystical terms. Every physical object in the universe was created by Hashem. And therefore, everything has some kind of latent potential of a connection to Hashem. But it needs to be drawn out sometimes by a person. We do this sometimes on our holidays and all the time with our engagement with the world. I'll give you some examples. The Daled Minim, the 4 species, the Lulav, Etrek, Hadass, and Arava, they're all actually taken just from nature. But we can make a bracha on that if we lift it up al netilat lulav. We make tefillin and mezuzot and sifrei Torah. And we cook food for Shabbat. And then we eat the food on Shabbat. And it's not the same food as the rest of the week. Not because we haven't made special foods ever during the week, but because on Shabbat, we have elevated it in a spiritual way. Kiddush and Hamotzi and brachot on food, and of course, Birkat HaMazon. All of these aspects of our physical lives are to be mal v'nitzotza. Says the Zohar HaKadosh, that's true of those 42 places. The Jewish people understood, and therefore, says the Or HaChaim, some places they stayed for a year. The work took a year. And other times, they stayed for 12 hours. Why? Because it was much more accessible to be mal v'nitzotza of that place. Well, we're in a place now. Where are we? We are, at this moment, still on the Jewish journey. And where are we? We are still engaged in the miracle of Jewish survival, only thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And number 3, we're also engaged in a great mission, a mission that wherever we are, we need to find out how we can be mal v'nitzotza of that place, how to take our station, whether we're stuck in our house, whether we're going out just a little bit, whether we're calling people on the phone, whether we're able to go to shul, not able to go to shul, whatever it is, we have something we need to be doing. We have a tafkid. Let's try to think about what that tafkid might be, each and every person. Let's do our best to fulfill it, recognizing such as we can that this too is part of the great travelogue of Jewish history. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom.